As you know, this is Measure of an Episode. Our continuing mission is to explore what makes a Star Trek episode a good Star Trek episode and not just good TV. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Paul, and this week's episode is Voyager 304, The Swarm. The blurb is, Voyager is attacked by swarms of tiny spaceships. The Doctor is losing his memory, and Torres activates a program run by a familiar hologram.
Last time we tried to guess what the familiar hologram was. We were debating whether or not it was
very wrong.
We were so wrong. We thought it was either a love interest or a cameo, celebrity cameo. Nope, it was the Doctor.
It was the Doctor, which I had remembered once it happened. The episode, I didn't remember the episode at all, but that character, that character actually rang a bell. The tiny spaceships thing is a big reveal. I mean, they don't know what they're getting into. I mean, the whole show starts off with this really weird conversation.
That's a good point.
Like, out of context, the conversation that Torres and Paris are having at the beginning of the episode, because I don't know where they are in their relationship. I don't know if they've been together and have since broken up. I actually have no idea. Maybe do you know that?
No, actually, until you said that, I was like, did they ever date? But clearly, you remember more than I do. So
they get together, and I think that they break up, and then they think they get back together.
Okay.
It's sort of the same thing as Riker and Troy,
right?
But I could not decipher whether or not that had happened yet, because Paris seems to be demonstrating some jealousy, and Torres is a little bit too harsh for him to just be a colleague at this point. So it's really weird. Like, it's very interesting to see these episodes out of context like that. I think because at this point Voyager is still pretty episodic, so they can't just pick up where they left off, and so they have to have some sort of conversation that gets us into the episode without. I guess they felt like, well, we don't want to be too plot heavy. Let's do some banal conversation at the beginning before the inciting incident happens. And that's why I think they have this conversation, because unless they're setting up, unless the next episode happens to be they get together or something, it's just weird.
Well, yeah, and just speaking to this episode specifically, there's no bookend. So we start learning about this. What was Freddie Bisto? Is that what it was?
Right. Yeah.
And like that's all we ever hear about him. Like there's no end part where like she does meet up with him or she goes out with Paris on the lake instead. Like there was nothing.
Right, and they do that a lot, I think specifically on this show. There are a lot of times where the main cast will refer to another crewman on the ship who never surfaces. There is always, like, I think Harry and Tom always talk about these twins. Like, there's always the something twins. I remember that from watching the episode.
Right.
And there's always this weird sexual undertone with that. But I don't think we ever meet them. Maybe one episode we meet them.
Yeah, I feel like there's one episode where they do a holodeck thing, and one of them is actually with one of the twins. I don't remember for sure though.
Right. Well, we'll probably never find out.
Right. Well, we will sometime in these 703 episodes.
Yeah. In terms of, is this a good Star Trek episode? I'm going to say no.
Oh no. Yeah, I would completely agree. Like this was just bad TV overall. It was not a good Star Trek episode, and it was not a good TV episode. Just based off of what my theory is on what makes a good Star Trek episode a good Star Trek episode, everything in this was a sci-fi. Well, no, the first problem was a non-sci-fi problem. They had a barrier that they had to figure out how to get around. Everything else was a sci-fi problem and a sci-fi solution. They came up with technobabble to fix it, and it worked. And like realizing that we're dealing with the main crew and realizing that there's a sci-fi solution, there was no tension in this episode at all.
Yeah, the whole Doctor thing, I can understand why.
Let's get back to that a little bit later, because I definitely want to talk about that resolution,
which is kind of the B plot. But I would say that the B plot has a lot more airtime than the A plot. I mean, the whole swarm thing is almost a non-issue in a way, and in terms of how much screen time it gets.
Oh, absolutely.
We should start keeping a timer and start timing the B plot and the A plot and see which one has more screen time. I do wonder how that will pan out. In TNG, it always felt like the B plot was way less screen time than the A plot.
Well, yeah. So then in that case, would you say the B plot is the personal story no matter what? Or is the A plot the one that gets the most amount of airtime no matter what?
I mean, at this point, if we were just to use this episode alone, the Doctor is the A plot.
Okay.
And the other dangerous, life-threatening problem that happens to the ship, that's kind of marginalized.
Ancillary,
in a way.
yeah.
So I don't know how. I mean, usually with the inciting incident in the cold open, that's the A plot, which is the case in this episode. But that's usually what they spend the most time on in the episode, which is not the case here. So maybe it depends on how you want to look at it, but maybe part of the criteria has to be that the A plot is usually established in the first act, in the cold open.
Right. No, I would agree with that. So yeah. So the main plot is the cold open.
But somehow, this is another disqualification of The Swarm for being a good Star Trek episode, because not only is it a piece of shit, but it doesn't follow the rules.
So for those of you who don't remember The Swarm, strange aliens randomly attack Paris and Torres while they're on a reconnaissance mission, I guess, because they heard a strange signal, and they're trying to figure out what that signal was and why Paris and Torres were attacked. And then the B plot is the Doctor has been studying opera, and he starts to progressively lose more and more of his memory, and they realize what's degrading. Like his program is degrading, and they've got to figure out a way to either expand it or they have to reboot him.
So as an aside for the Doctor, obviously Robert Picardo has the ability to sing. I wouldn't say he's a wonderful tenor, but he has the ability to sing.
So you think that was him?
Oh, yes. And do they hang on it? I mean, it's not just a couple of that scene where we are introduced to him singing is a 3 or 4 minute scene.
Oh, yeah.
Then this is almost directly after the 3 or 4 minute scene of the cold open of them having.
It is, yeah. It's directly after. They don't address the inciting moment at all for like another 5 or 6 minutes.
Right. I mean, and I could see it being okay. So they have him sing for 15 seconds, and then they rush him out of the holodeck to go to the sickbay. But that didn't happen. He was singing for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, what happened? First of all, did they wake up and then pilot the runabout back to Voyager? And if that's the case, then they could so why didn't they go pick him up? And if they went and picked him up, then they violated the space anyway, because the conceit of the show is that they took the runabout and the runabout violated the space.
Right.
But why were they doing that? Like, doesn't Voyager have way better sensors and shit that they can detect stuff better? Like, what was the whole point other than it was convenient for the plot?
The only thing I could think is Paris went to Janeway and said, hey, there was this weird signal, or he was on the bridge and he was trying to find it. And she said, we got to keep moving. And he said, well, can I use the roundabout to go try to find this source? And, which kind of leads into the schizophrenia of Janeway.
Well, it wouldn't be a Voyager episode if she wasn't doing something unethical.
Right.
And so, okay, so let's get into that for a second, because that totally struck me. So the whole point of them maintaining a hierarchy of command is because they felt that no matter how far away they were from the Federation, that they should uphold the Federation standards, that they themselves are, they represent the Federation.
Oh my gosh, you're right. I totally forgot that.
And so that's the whole point. They still wear uniforms, and they were able to convince the Maquis to wear uniforms. Like, we're going to tear each other apart if we don't try and stay civilized. And until Janeway starts making decisions, because she said, they're like, look, the Prime Directive says we should go around even if it takes more time. Like, it's against the rules. And then she's like, that's too inconvenient. So we're going to ignore that again. And we're going to do whatever I say that we're going to do, right? Like,
right.
She decides to go and essentially engage in warfare with another race who made it very clear they don't want you in their space, right? Yeah. Very clear. There is no question. This is, I think, going to become a huge problem with Janeway as we get through. I mean, or just as a character, her character doesn't make any sense. Right.
Well, yeah. And in that briefing, I have to say Tuvok had the absolute best line of the entire series. Or not the entire series, the entire episode, where he very clearly states the obvious. If we can't go around it, we will have to go through it.
I know.
Like, wow, thanks, Tuvok.
And normally he's sort of the source of reason in the show. I mean, he's usually very cold and calculated, but he's usually right.
Right.
And Tuvok, whoever, I feel like the writing is just not as good in this episode.
I would agree.
On the whole. Yeah.
Right.
There's this moment in the episode when they decide to go through with the plan where the act, I think, ends on a slow camera move pushing into Tuvok's face, where it seems like he's uncomfortable with this idea, and like he knows something bad is going to happen.
Right.
But nothing ever comes from that. At least he doesn't talk about it.
Yeah. No. Through the whole episode, he never says "I told you so."
Yeah. But is he saying this is a bad move because we're likely to be attacked, or is he uncomfortable with it because morally or ethically? Like, it was unclear.
It totally was unclear. So I actually interpreted it as both. You know, when he talked about Janeway, going against violating Federation rule, and he says, "You never cease to surprise me" or something. I took that as like an insult. You know,
she totally gives attitude to him. Well,
right.
I perhaps like the way that this episode could have turned into a good Star Trek episode was the exploration of that, because Roddenberry always talked about how Star Trek was not about technology or space or anything like that specifically. That was more of the setting, that it was more about morality. And that would be a moment to explore that. And that would probably, if it was a better episode, there would be more time dedicated instead of the Doctor plot line.
Or even, taking the issue of, is it better to save the time and violate the Prime Directive? Or should we violate the Prime Directive or should we keep the Prime Directive and go around this two-dimensional border?
I loved, by the way, just as an aside, I loved watching Chakotay, like with the shitty prop that they gave him. It's like this like 4-inch by 4-inch map that they said, okay, you got to point here and then point here. And it has to look like you know what you're talking about. He's just pointing to two spots.
Right.
I'm sure that he had no idea what was going on.
Oh, yeah. No, completely black screen. But that was something else that, it's kind of been a Star Trek trope in general, I feel like. But they talked about how it added 15 months to their travel. But everything that they showed was a two-dimensional map. Like, they didn't show anything about, like, how big it was in either direction, like how big this three-dimensional thing in space was.
Right. Like, how far in the Z-axis would it have gone?
Yeah.
They stay clear of that. They also always refer to distance in kilometers, no matter how many kilometers. And if you're going to use the metric system, use the metric system. There are other, if you're going to say they're over 16 billion kilometers away, that's not, you're doing it wrong. There's a whole reason that we don't still talk in kilobytes, right?
Right.
Well, how big is that PDF you just sent? Oh, it's 29 billion kilobytes. Is that okay? Will your email get that? Like, no, you would say gigabytes or gigometers.
Right.
So if you're going to say 10 million kilometers, I still have no idea what that means. So just say megometers.
So, Janeway refused to add that time. But then when they're passing through, she stops to scan the ship and like talk to that person.
That was weird. That was strange. And shows very little remorse when the guy actually dies.
Right. Well, and story-wise, like he didn't add anything. I don't feel like he added anything to the plot that they didn't figure out based on what the ships were doing.
Right. The only thing that it added was at the end, there was still a ship attached to it for some reason. And so one of the bad guys. And so the bad guy's ship scanned them. And so they had that confrontation with them. So I guess that was what that whole sequence was for. Because you're right. The alien doesn't give them any more information at all.
Well, yeah. And they didn't need, like, as they were passing by the ship, we could have just seen that lone swarm ship come off. And then, they could have because they were scanning the area anyway, watching the other ships, they could have said, oh, there's a live one on our tail or whatever. I
do wonder how these episodes are written, because this one is, even for Voyager, it didn't have the cohesion at all. It just didn't make any sense. It's just, maybe they did. Maybe none of them make any sense. Like, I haven't seen it in a while. Maybe they're all like this.
Well, and another part that really bothered me was, why was Kes the smartest person in the room when it came to rebooting the Doctor. Like, I get that she had the biggest emotional attachment, but she was, like, I felt like she took the captain's position on this, like saying he's now a member of the crew. He's grown in the last 2 years, and if anyone was sick, he would do his best to, like, take care of them. So now we need to do the same. For everybody to be like, well, yeah, let's reset him. And then Kes, this outsider who's just been hanging out with the Doctor, you know, is like, well, no, you can't do that. And then, yeah, Janeway comes over and she's like, we're not going to reboot you. We're going to do everything we can to save you. I am the best captain ever.
And she has that smile. I'm like, what are you smiling about? This is
right.
This is a terrible situation that everybody's in. Maybe the one way that this sort of relates in a way that that meets our criteria is it's obviously about dementia in some way.
Oh, for sure.
And so, I mean, it just wasn't done very well, but
it was not, because it was a sci-fi solution, you know, like,
and it didn't make any sense anyway.
No. But so going back to Janeway's thing, you know, they were talking about how reinitializing him was kind of the last choice. But then she's like, keep him talking, keep him thinking to try and slow down his degeneration or his degradation. And I was like, if you've already decided to reboot your hard drive, you do not try and play with it for as long as possible to try and keep it as good as possible.
She just wanted out of the room. Like, she just needed to give some sort of order so she could leave.
Right.
That's my guess.
That's Janeway's commanding modus operandi. Give a command so she can leave.
Exactly. No, I agree. And so something occurred to me in that specific scene as well. So because this is before widescreen HD TV came out, everything is it's like a square image, basically, right?
Right.
And so they knew that when they filmed these things. And so they blocked all the scenes out, so everybody's standing super close to each other when they speak to each other, so everyone will fit in the frame that needs to be in the frame.
Right.
And so that method always carries out when they leave a room too. So when two characters have to leave a room, they kind of like have to trip over themselves by walking so close to each other, because just for the efficiency of the scene, for them to get out immediately, like they're super close to each other. Next time you watch it, watch for it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye out for on the next episode. So the last two things that I want to talk about. So, like, why, if their whole ship is a computer, why didn't they just copy the Zimmerman program before they used one of the Zimmermans to attach to the Doctor program?
Well, I didn't. They kind of rushed over how they solved it. I understood. Sure. I understood that they had this diagnostic program that was there. First of all, how did they not think of this? Like they had already been doing like a bunch of brainstorming and were like, well, we can't think of anything. And then she's like, wait a minute, I got an idea. And then they like went to the thing that they're supposed to go to immediately after they're having trouble with their hologram. And so they go to this thing. So they eventually come up with the idea, well, can we graft this thing on top of the program? And at this point, it's just, okay, we've written ourselves into a corner.
Right.
Like, we don't know what should have happened was someone said to Kes, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like, you're 3 years old.
Right.
You don't even know, like, how have you studied all of this super complicated holographic, whatever matrix bullshit? Like, go back to sickbay and inject yourself with something. But I don't like, usually if this were to have happened on Next Gen, I would have at least been able to explain or understand what happened, right? In layman's terms.
Right.
That did not happen here. They just sort of, like you said, did some technobabble, and it was like, oh, it worked.
Right. Well, what did?
And that was the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah. My theory as to what happened with Star Trek from DS9 onward. DS9 gets more of a pass because there was a lot of physical stuff going on, so you could see what they were talking about. And they were also coming off of Enterprise or Next Generation, so they were able to. First off, they were given a lot of platitude with that, and also they had those characters, and they still did it a little bit, but it faded out with DS9, and then I think in Voyager and Enterprise. They just give the technobabble without giving the layman analogy.
I don't know if it made it better, though. I don't know if they saved time. I mean,
it absolutely didn't. Yeah, no, yeah, I completely think that it was a benefit to the show, and it became Voyager because of it. They're giving sci-fi solutions and they're not explaining how that solution is going to fit. It's just technobabble to the point where it works.
So when they're solving problems, by the way, I don't know if you noticed it, but it happened a couple of times. I think Torres does it and Kes does it, where they have this Star Trekian brainstorm pace, where they pace 1.5 steps in 2 directions while they're figuring something out, and then they arrive back in the same place that they were.
I did not notice.
Yeah, so it's the same problem where they can't have you pacing all over the set because it's lit in a certain way, and so they can't just have you stand there and say your lines. It would get boring, and so they have this thing. Well, you're figuring something out, so you would pace, right? And so they have them pace within the confines of the shot, which is usually 1.5 to 2 steps, and it looks ridiculous. It looks ridiculous. Nobody does that. Where you take 1.5 steps, turn around, and go the other way while you're talking to yourself. I mean, I pace when I'm on the phone.
Right,
all the
and you
time.
circle the house. Right. Well, and I would imagine it's a triangle too. So it's 1.5 steps away, it's 1.5 steps across, and then they come up with the solution and they stride back to the original point.
Yeah, exactly. And it always feels so stilted because obviously it was blocked according to their lines. Okay, by the time you get to this place, you need to have said this line.
Right.
So for editing and stuff. So you can see them trying to rack their brain into moving their feet exactly to where they're supposed to be, and while saying this super stilted dialogue. Mm-hmm. And it's like, they kind of pull it off. I'm sure you get really good at it when you work in TV because that's pretty much every scene.
Right.
Especially in Star Trek where you have to remember all of these words that don't make any sense.
Right. And so just the last thing that I wanted to say about the dementia and Robert Picardo was like, so he's a jerk when he comes back. So clearly the grafting didn't work. And then he starts singing the opera. Actually, I watched this with my daughters, and they kind of said the same thing. They were like, "What happened with the swarm ship? And what does that opera even mean?" I was like, "You're right. This episode didn't answer any questions."
Okay, so what I pulled from it, I actually kind of tuned out with all the technobabble. Like I just stopped listening because it didn't make any sense.
Right.
And there was not another character there to sum it all up in a simple analogy.
Right. I don't understand. Explain to me in simple terms. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I got the impression that it was going to be some sort of, it would take time for his new program to graft onto the new whatever. And so he had to reset. And so I'm assuming by episode 305, he's going to be entirely back to normal.
Right.
And I feel like if this were a modern show, that would become one of the longer arcs of the season, is the Doctor sort of regaining his memory and learning new things and kind of like his rehabilitation after this. But sure. I'm sure that's not what happens.
Yeah, I mean, there might be one throwaway bit of dialogue in the next episode, of like, how's your grafting come along? And he's like, good, all of my memories are back intact.
I don't know. This was kind of a terrible episode. I mean, even for Voyager.
I want to get into it a little bit more after we've seen a couple more Voyager episodes, but I think that Harry Kim and Tom Paris are actually, like, the actors should have been playing the opposite role. It just came up on me on this episode.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know. I mean, why you think that? Is it just because you feel like physically they embody those other roles better?
I don't think Paris, both in his demeanor and in his just vocal range, I don't think that he comes off as rebellious and angry and imposing as Harry Kim can.
He does have kind of a swagger about him, that in some ways comes off, but that just could be that I know him from the role, and that's.
But I feel like in the episodes that I'm remembering, which are vague and long ago, Harry Kim, like when he gets angry and it gets threatening. And when Paris gets angry, it feels like it's part of the script and he's supposed to be angry now. So, okay. So far our baseline is still intact and this was a horrible Star Trek episode.
Yes. It made no sense. It was terrible. I guess it's good that we're getting the bad ones out of the way.
Yeah, right? Let's eat the frog.
Okay. So let's go. Let's see what episode we're going to watch next. I'm going to pull up our handy random episode generator.
I hope we get something that's at least mediocre.
DS9-302, The Search Part 2. So we have to watch 2 of them.
Okay.
2 episodes. Originally aired October 3rd, 1994. It actually is the opener, the season 3 opener. Preparing for possible invasion by the Jem'Hadar, Kira determines that Deep Space Nine lacks the firepower to defend itself. That's the blurb for part 1.
Okay.
The blurb for part 2. Odo and Kira have landed on a love planet. That's what I thought it said.
And that's where it all started.
Yeah. Odo and Kira have landed on a lone planet in the Amerion Nebula. Amerion.
I'd say Amerion. Yeah.
Amerion. Which they have discovered is Odo's home world.
Okay, so we go from a possible invasion, and they lack the firepower, to Odo and Kira landing on Odo's home world.
I have a feeling this is just laziness on the blurb writer's part.
Well, sure, but so based
Again?
on those two things, let's put this episode together. Why, so Kira has to leave to find more firepower, and she has to take the security officer with her. And
yeah, why would you take the two most important people in an invasion and take them away?
We'll find out
next time.